It's time for our next festival edition playlist video. I wanted to be outside today, and the weather just did not cooperate. So here I am, indoors, and it's time to talk about Sukkot, right? The time is upon us, and had the opportunity, as I often do, to watch one of the series, listen to one of the series that's at Aleph-Beta, not from Rabbi David Foreman. This was with his colleague there, Emu Shalev, but it was actually hosted by one of the scholars at Aleph-Beta, which I really enjoyed. And they were looking at this verse about the lulav, the four kinds. So the thing that everybody thinks about when they think of the festival of Sukkot, the festival of booths, the festival of tabernacles, is they think about that concept of building a sukkah and staying in those makeshift shelters and tents. You can go back on our playlist and see some of those basic ideas on this playlist and from years past. But instead of thinking about the sukkah, which is what we often think about and talk about, they wanted to focus in on the four kinds. And the scholar says, I really feel like there has to be something here on these four kinds. It shows up in Leviticus chapter 23, and I'm going to start reading in verse 40. It says this: on the first day of this festival, you shall take the product of hadar trees, which the translation there is usually fruitful in the Jewish mind. You are to take the fruit of beautiful. Hadar there, it's not quite etymologically right, but some have said it's supposed to be a beautiful tree. The fruit of a beautiful tree. Branches of palm trees. Boughs of leafy trees. And willows of the brook. So there's four things there. On the first day, you shall take a fruit. You're supposed to take fruit from a beautiful tree. So fruit, an etrog is what I believe it's usually called. The branches of palm trees. So you have a palm frond. And then the boughs of leafy trees, which is usually understood to be a myrtle tree. Hadassim is the Hebrew word there. Hadassah is myrtle tree. So you've got a fruit, you've got a palm frond, you've got a branch of a myrtle tree, and then willows of the brook, or a branch of a river willow. So it's a particular willow tree that grows on the banks of the river. A willow of the brook, this translation says. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. You shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. And so the scholar basically is leading this conversation. He says this verse here says that these four things, these three branches and a fruit, are somehow connected with the idea of joy. Joy seems to be, in fact, the scholar says, when you look at the name of the rabbinical names of the festivals, there's the time of our liberation, which is the three festivals you're supposed to be in Jerusalem for. You're supposed to celebrate the time of our liberation, the time of the giving of Torah, and the time of our joy. So Passover is the time of our liberation. That makes sense. Shavuot is the time of receiving Torah. And then this third one is the Sukkot is the time of our joy. And so joy is this prominent theme in Sukkot. This idea that you're supposed to take these four things and be happy with them. And Emu and this scholar, I can't remember the scholar's name, I should have written it down, but the scholar and Emu have spent some time talking about how the Hebrew there, it can mean, you take these four things and then take joy. Or the Hebrew there could be, take these four things and be joyful with them. Like these four things are actually going to bring you and be a part of experiencing the joy. So you have these four things. I love this one phrase. Emu said, it's like I have a ritual bouquet, which is an odd-looking bouquet, if I do say so myself. These three different branches of trees and then a fruit make for an odd bouquet, if I do say so myself. But I'm supposed to show up with this ritual bouquet for God, and I'm supposed to shake it. I'm supposed to be joyful with it. I'm supposed to dance with it. And the scholar had this wonderful observation. He says, when I think about this first command, I'm supposed to take fruit. He said, that phrase struck me, taking fruit. He says, where's the first time I saw somebody take fruit? Well, we saw Eve take the fruit in Genesis chapter 2 and 3. Eve takes the fruit. By the way, what did she notice about the tree? They discussed this on the... By the way, I'm going to put this series. I think it's going to be behind a paywall for members. But if you have a membership, I'll put the series... I'll put a link in it to the description in the video. But what she takes fruit, but she takes fruit from a... What did she notice about the tree? That it was beautiful. It was pleasing to the eye. So she's taking fruit from a beautiful tree. So there's the taking. There's the beauty. When they take from the tree in Genesis, there's sadness, shame, guilt. But in Sukkot, you're taking from a beautiful tree, and there's joy, rejoicing, happiness. In the Genesis story, they hide from God. But in the Sukkot story, command, you are rejoicing literally before God, in front of God, in his presence is the concept in the Hebrew. So there's this direct tie to the Genesis story, and yet a reversal of the Genesis story. We're taking fruit from a beautiful tree, but the first time we took fruit from a beautiful tree, it led to shame and hiding. But this time we take fruit from the beautiful tree, and it leads to rejoicing and joy and presence and intimacy with God. In the first story, they ate the fruit, but in this story, you're specifically not eating the fruit. This is the harvest time. And instead of just taking the harvest and taking it home, and just take the harvest, take it home, eat it, indulge, you're taking the harvest and you're bringing it before God and rejoicing. That seems to be a key difference. Instead of one item, there's 4 items. Instead of just taking the fruit and eating it, I'm now taking the fruit and a branch and a branch and a branch, and I'm rejoicing. I'm not eating it. And so the scholar said, I find it interesting how these items, these 4 kinds, are described. I have the fruit, and then the thing that I'm told about the next tree is that it's branches. I'm taking branches from a palm tree. So fruit, branches. The next one is boughs of a leafy tree. So now we're talking about like the tree itself. So we're going from fruit to branches to tree. And the scholar says, I'm starting to notice like a theme of the 4 kinds. The fruit is going to be attached to the branch. The branch is going to be attached to a tree. And the tree, what's the part of the 4th kind? River willows, or a willow of the brook. What's the defining characteristic of the 4th? The water. Well, what does every tree have to be connected to on some level in order to survive and eventually produce fruit? Water. So the fruit's connected to the branch connected to the tree, and the tree's connected to water. It's like the 4 kinds take me from the fruit all the way back to the ultimate source of that fruit, because who provides the water? God. So the rabbi and the scholar talk about this inherent connection. That Sukkot is, in so many ways, a festival of recognition. That we are recognizing in the 4 kinds, in the fruit, and the palm frond, and the myrtle branch, and the willow tree, the willow branch, like all these things that seem so random and so arbitrary and so weird and so odd, actually provide us with a roadmap to realize what the holiday's all about. They started to kind of like reflect on this in the final video. I think there were 4 videos altogether. And in the 4th video, they were reflecting on this. And they said, it's almost like when you go back to the Garden of Eden. It's almost like that tree of knowledge of good and evil. You could almost call it a recognition tree. Like what God was really doing was God was saying, you know, you're free to partake of all creation. You're free to eat. You're free to have joy. You're free as long as you recognize that I'm king, that I'm creator. Let me have this. You can have everything else. Let me have this one tree. Like the principle being, you can literally enjoy it all as long as you recognize where it comes from and who's in charge. And of course, the story of Adam and Eve is that they don't recognize that. They take from that tree. They abuse that relationship. But it's like God is creating a space for us to enjoy. And when we abuse that, everything falls apart in tragedy. I remember I've been reading a bunch of stuff from Jonathan Sacks. I think I've even shared some of his stuff in our spring festivals early this year on this playlist. And one of the things that he says is that there are 2 kinds of laws. There's laws about morality, behavior, ethics, how to live. This is how we bring shalom. And then there's another set of laws where God essentially, it's almost like he creates a game. He creates the rules to a game, and the game is how we're going to be able to relate to him. The game is how we're going to be able to thrive and build a flourishing relationship where we get to cleave to God. It's like Sukkot, and even the Garden of Eden. It's like in the Garden of Eden, God had created a game to make sure that we flourished. A game where he said, you can eat from anything, just don't eat from this tree. Make sure you recognize, and when we didn't recognize, it falls apart. In Sukkot, God's created a way for us to recognize where our blessing comes from so that we can truly enjoy it. Because when we left the garden, we could have said, like, the one thing I've learned is that I'm not supposed to enjoy creation. But that wasn't the case. It's not really what God wanted. God wanted us to enjoy creation. And we just have to remember that there's a creator behind the creation. And Sukkot is the way of reminding ourselves where it comes from. And so I loved that. One of the other things they made a comment on towards the very end of their teaching is this continues to teach us whether or not we had an amazing harvest or a weak harvest. It's not like every single year you had an amazing harvest. You're not celebrating abundance. You might have an abundance. You might have had an incredible year, and you will be celebrating the fact that God's blessed you in such a way. But the point of Sukkot is not to celebrate abundance. You might not have abundance. You may be struggling to have enough, and yet Sukkot still leads you to joy because Sukkot invites you to realize where it all comes from, whether it's a lot, whether it's a little, whether it's barely enough, whether you don't know where your next bit's going to come from. Sukkot says, celebrate the giver of all those gifts. Celebrate the one who is in charge of that creation. Recognize whether you have a lot, whether you don't have enough. Sukkot provides the avenue to recognize where all that provision comes from, no matter your experience. Anyway, I just love that. I thought it was a great reflection for this year's Sukkot video. Thought I would share it with you. I'll put the link to that series in the description of this video. Man, is it about time to get back to the Hall of Faith series, I think? We need to get back. We left Hebrews 11 hanging for a few weeks. It's time to get back into that and pick up where we left off. We'll talk to you in the next video.